American sociologist Henry Giroux argues that unless we have real democracy in place that actually helps us to flourish, be educated, and find our vocation, then we are prey to living a zombified life. Giroux shows that democracy involves having social freedom, the freedom from poverty, the freedom from lack of care, the freedom from lack of education. Here we actually become citizens who have a shared sense of hope and responsibility to others rather than zombies in serving the agenda of masters. Giroux argues that our current system is informed by a machinery of social and civil death. It is not the survival of the fittest for Giroux, but the survival of the wealthiest who feed off our labor, work, and energy. He writes, "You have a consolidation of power that is so overwhelming, not just in its ability to control resources and drive the economy, to redistribute wealth upward, but basically to provide the most fraudulent definition of what a democracy should be." Giroux sees our current political system as zombified. But what are the assumptions of this capitalist zombie state? He writes, "The notion that profit-making is the essence of democracy, the notion that economics is divorced from ethics, the notion that the only obligation of citizenship is consumerism, the notion that the welfare state is pathology, that any form of dependency basically is disreputable and needs to be attacked." But capitalism is not democracy. This fact is clear, which is the reason why capitalism can function in China, North Korea, and in Saudi Arabia. Capitalism is the monster that can take root in any state. Citizens are now reduced to data, consumers, and commodities. They, for Giroux, become zombies. While power is regulated to benefit the rich, to serve the wealthy and so-called elites, then society cannot survive for long. If it does survive, then its very existence begins to resemble a work camp, as Agamben showed. Giroux believes in the social contract that takes seriously the moral obligations that people have to each other. This means that governments provide for the health, safety, and welfare of all its citizens. Institutions could take moral obligations seriously. For example, hospitals could become actual places of healing. Schools could become actual places of education rather than mere training. Spiritual centers could actually transform lives. Of course, there are individual persons that do make society better, but overall, institutions for Giroux seem only to serve narrow-minded corporate interests. In America especially, anything that is publicly and governmentally funded is seen as pathological. But notice how the United States government spent $3 trillion on invading other countries when mere billions could have fixed social inequities across the world. In a throwaway culture, people are treated as mere things and commodities. This is what Giroux calls a politics of disposability. Giroux reasons that in such a culture, life begins to resemble a mall. He writes, "You can't walk on a college campus today and not see everybody represented there, from local banks to Disneyland to local shops, all selling things." For Giroux, everything becomes a brand, while values that cannot be commodified, such as trust, justice, honesty, integrity, caring for others, are simply absent. Like zombies who feed on brains, the wars of culture have always been a war on the mind. This is why philosophy is the antidote to zombie mindlessness and to the idiocy that currently dominates our culture. A politics that is zombified is designed to oppose any kind of legislation that lessens human suffering. The scenes of people foraging in zombie films are the actual lives of human persons across all our cultural worlds. In such a state where human life is discarded, death, violence, and cruelty are the norm. Giroux writes, zombies love death-dealing institutions, which account for why they rarely criticize the bloated military budget and the rise of the punishing state and its expanding prison system. The culture of cruelty establishes its reign when thinking and compassion are overruled by greed and selfishness. In the United States, there are 13.3 million homeless children. 1 in 5 live in poverty. It is not that the language of certain politicians is indifferent. It is the fact that their language actually seeks out the destruction of others. So when a Republican politician says that people on public assistance are, quote, like stray animals, what can be done to counter such willful stupidity? This is especially problematic in a nation that calls itself Christian. The message of the Republican politician runs counter to Jesus' teaching that the widow, the alien, and the orphan need to be protected. For Giroux, popular culture not only trades in violence as entertainment, it delivers violence to a society addicted to an endless barrage of sensations, the lure of instant gratification, and a pleasure principle steeped in graphic and extreme images of human mayhem and torture. Giroux argues that the line between virtual and real violence becomes blurred. It is little wonder that zombie films answer this pathological need for violence. Giroux argues that the violence inherited in culture are not isolated expressions of a marginalized failure of a system. They are a system of authoritarianism that is intensified without apology. For Giroux, our current Western culture is built on a foundation of authoritarianism that erodes any form of social responsibility towards those who are truly in need. Why, for example, are citizens in rich Western nations living in poverty? Why are so many living on the streets, hungry, homeless, without health care, and in despair? Giroux continues, when ethics and any vestige of social responsibility and the public good are trampled beneath the hooves of the financial state, there is no space for democratic values or justice. Giroux believes that the state needs to uphold justice and social responsibility for all its citizens, and not merely for those who have the largest sum of money. Giroux is critical of the radical individualism that he sees in the United States, which has resulted in a sea of inequity. Again, our political systems and our symbolic interventions are responsible for our plight. Take the example of the master signifier. The master signifier is like a symbol that we all come to believe in. We believe that there is an actual king or queen and a throne of power. But there really isn't a king or queen. But through our imagination and symbolism, we elevate the common chair into a throne and an ordinary person into a king or queen. For example, think of the Berlin Wall. What was once a deadly wall because of its division of East and West Berlin and the symbolism of the Iron Curtain became simple concrete to be torn down. One can even relate the master signifier to the 2020 COVID-19 pandemic. Our normal way of living and existing within the framework that we knew was brought to a halt under various measures to control the virus and to start up the holy grail of the stock market. The thin line that prevents us from seeing our own shared humanity is where violence and cruelty are enacted. It is not the fictions of Hollywood we should believe is true. These zombies do not exist. The real monsters are those that would take our lives away without hesitation and without remorse to serve their own men.